Dim the lights. Put your phone face down. Let your shoulders drop a little. You don't need to learn anything important right now. You don't need to remember names or dates. This is just history, drifting by, like a very long, slightly sarcastic bedtime story. Tonight, we're talking about famous kings and queens, the legendary ones, the portraits on the wall types, the people who supposedly ruled with strength, beauty, and divine purpose. And we're going to gently peel that illusion away. Not dramatically, not violently, just calmly and a little judgmentally. Because behind the crowns and titles, there were a lot of deeply strange people, unhealthy people, emotionally unprepared people, people who absolutely should not have been in charge of anything more complex than a houseplant. So let's begin, nice and easy, with one of history's favorite royal families to quietly side-eye, the Habsburgs. Of course it's the Habsburgs. Now, the Habsburg dynasty ruled large chunks of Europe for centuries. Spain, Austria, the Holy Roman Empire, basically everywhere that could support a throne and a really bad family tree. They believed strongly in keeping power within the family, very strongly, almost obsessively. Cousins married cousins, uncles married nieces, aunts married nephews. If you're already wincing, don't worry. So did their jaws, literally. The most famous result of this genetic enthusiasm was the Habsburg jaw, a protruding lower jaw so pronounced that it became a dynastic signature. You could recognize a Habsburg from across a candlelit hall just by the way their face sort of leaned forward. And no one embodied this better than King Charles II of Spain. Charles II was born in 1661, and from the moment he arrived, it was clear that something had gone deeply wrong. His parents were uncle and niece, which, biologically speaking, is not ideal. Even in the 17th century, people quietly noticed. Charles struggled to walk until he was around 4. He couldn't speak properly until much later. He suffered from constant illness, seizures, digestive problems, chronic weakness. His jaw was so large that he struggled to chew his food. He drooled. He slurred his speech, and his tongue barely fit inside his mouth. Contemporary observers described him as kind, well-meaning, and painfully fragile, which is a very gentle way of saying he was absolutely not built to rule an empire. But rule he did, because he had the right bloodline, such as it was. Charles spent much of his life being carried around, advised aggressively by courtiers, and prayed over by priests who were convinced he was cursed. And honestly, given the family history, that wasn't the wildest theory. He married twice. Neither marriage produced children, which again shocked absolutely no one who had been paying attention to his medical chart. When Charles II died at the age of 38, his body was reportedly a mess of internal failures. His heart was small, his organs were worn out, his blood was not doing great, and with his death, the Spanish Habsburg line ended. Not with a bang, but with a long, wheezing fade-out. Let's gently float away from Spain now and drift northward to England, because England had its own collection of royal disasters, and they were just as emotionally exhausting. Let's talk about Henry VIII. Yes, that Henry, the 6 wives guy. Henry VIII is often remembered as bold, charismatic, larger than life, and to be fair, he was physically larger than life by the end. Henry began his reign as a handsome, athletic young king. He loved music, he wrote poetry, he jousted, he danced. He was, unfortunately, also deeply insecure and absolutely obsessed with having a male heir. This obsession would slowly eat away at him and everyone around him. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, gave him a daughter, Mary, and several pregnancies that ended in tragedy. Henry took this personally, as kings often do. Instead of accepting biology, he decided God was mad at Catherine, which was convenient, so he divorced her. Actually, he invented an entire new church to do it. Very efficient. Then came Anne Boleyn. Anne was clever, sharp-tongued, and not particularly interested in being a passive royal accessory. Henry adored her, until she failed to produce a son. She gave birth to Elizabeth, another daughter, and suddenly Anne went from beloved wife to inconvenient problem. Henry accused her of adultery, incest, witchcraft. The evidence was thin, but the execution was very real. Off with her head. And from that point on, things only spiraled. Henry married again, and again, and again. Each wife became part of the same pattern: hope, pregnancy, disappointment, blame. By the end of his life, Henry was obese, chronically ill, and deeply paranoid. He suffered from infected leg ulcers that never healed. They smelled. They leaked. He barely walked. He lashed out constantly. This was not the charming Renaissance prince of his youth.
This was a man trapped in his own decaying body, surrounded by fear, and convinced that everyone was plotting against him. And yet, history often remembers him as powerful. Let that sink in gently. Now let's drift forward in time just a little and stay in England with Henry's daughter, Mary I. Mary is remembered as Bloody Mary, which is not a great nickname. Mary grew up in emotional chaos. Her mother was cast aside, her legitimacy was questioned. She was separated from Catherine and forced to acknowledge Anne Boleyn as queen. It messed her up, deeply. Mary was intensely religious, rigid, lonely. When she finally became queen, she was determined to restore Catholicism, and she did so with burnings, a lot of burnings. Hundreds of Protestants were executed during her reign. And while this was not unusual for the time, history chose to remember her for it. Mary married Philip of Spain. He did not love her. He barely tolerated her. She experienced false pregnancies. Her body mimicked pregnancy symptoms, but no child ever came. Imagine that quiet devastation again and again. She died at 42, alone, ill, and convinced she had failed. And then came Elizabeth I. Elizabeth is often praised as a triumphant queen, the Virgin Queen, strong, independent. And yes, she was intelligent and politically skilled, but she was also deeply shaped by fear. Elizabeth watched her mother be executed. She saw how dangerous marriage could be, how quickly affection could turn lethal. So she never married. She never had children. She ruled well, but at the cost of constant emotional distance. She trusted few people. She slept lightly. She aged surrounded by flattery and isolation. Power protected her, but it also trapped her. Now let's gently leave England and drift toward France, because France had kings who were, let's say, a lot. Take Louis XIV, the Sun King. He ruled for over 70 years, which sounds impressive, and it was. But it also meant decades of absolute control and absolute ego. Louis believed he was the state, literally. He surrounded himself with luxury, gold, mirrors, perfume, so much perfume, because bathing was suspicious and water was dangerous, apparently. Louis suffered from constant health issues, dental problems, infections, a famously painful anal fistula that required surgery. Yes, royal history includes this. The surgery was public because privacy was optional when you were a living symbol. He survived, barely, and continued ruling as his children and grandchildren died around him. By the time he passed away, most of his direct heirs were already gone. The throne would eventually pass to his great-grandson, a child, and that child would grow up to be Louis XVI, but that is a story for later. For now, just let the image fade. Candlelight, heavy robes, echoing halls, kings and queens who looked powerful but were quietly unraveling. In the next part, we'll drift deeper into royal childhoods that never stood a chance, marriages that were doomed from the wedding night, and thrones that crushed the people who sat on them. For now, just breathe. Let the history blur together. You don't need to remember any of this. The crowns will still be heavy tomorrow. If you drifted off a little, that's perfect. If not, just settle in again. History is still moving very slowly for you. Last time, we left behind candlelit halls and aging monarchs who smelled faintly of perfume and untreated infections. Now we're going to ease into something even quieter and somehow sadder: royal childhoods. Because before kings and queens became legends, they were children, small, fragile, and usually born into expectations that would crush a fully grown adult, let alone a baby wrapped in silk. Let's start with a general rule of monarchy. If you were royal, your life was never really yours. From the moment you could sit upright, you belonged to the dynasty. Your body, your marriage, your future children, everything was political, even your survival. Let's drift back to medieval Europe for a moment, a time when infant mortality was high for everyone, but somehow even higher for royal families who insisted on repeating the same genetic mistakes over and over. Royal children were often sickly, not because they were cursed, but because their parents were usually related in ways that required diagrams and uncomfortable explanations. Take the children of the Spanish Habsburgs again. They were born pale, thin, often delayed. Many never reached adulthood, and the ones who did were raised in strict, suffocating environments. No running freely, no normal friendships. They were monitored constantly, tutored relentlessly, prayed over aggressively. Their beds were inspected, their food was controlled, their behavior was watched, and affection was formal. Imagine being 5 years old and knowing that one wrong illness could throw an entire empire into chaos. Very relaxing. Now let's float over to France again, to a little boy born in 1638, Louis Dieudonné, later known as Louis XIV. He was called God-given because his parents had struggled to produce an heir. That alone should tell you how much pressure was placed on him. As a child, Louis witnessed rebellion, civil unrest, nobles trying to overthrow royal authority. He was forced to flee Paris at one point, dragged from palace to palace. This experience stayed with him, deeply. It's part of why, later in life, he became obsessed with control, with being watched, with being obeyed. He never forgot the fear. Royal children remembered everything, even when they pretended not to. Now let's gently move eastward, toward Russia, because Russian royalty specialized in emotional trauma. Let's talk about Peter the Great. Peter was tall, restless, intensely curious, and raised in a court full of violence and instability. As a child, he watched guards mutiny, relatives murdered, power struggles explode around him. He developed nervous tics, facial spasms. His hands would shake when he was stressed, which, in Russia, was often. Peter grew into a ruler obsessed with modernization, westernization, ships, beards. He forced his nobles to shave,
literally cut their beards off, because nothing says progress like personal grooming mandates. But beneath his reforms was a deeply traumatized man. He was violent, impulsive, and capable of extreme cruelty. He even ordered the execution of his own son, Alexei, because Alexei didn't share his vision for Russia. Father of the Year material. Now let's slow it down again and drift back toward England, because England produced one of the saddest royal children in history, Edward VI, son of Henry VIII. Finally, a male heir. Henry got what he wanted. Edward became king at just 9 years old. 9. He was sickly from the start, thin, weak. He was educated intensely, overworked. Religion, politics, languages, all piled onto a body that barely held together. Edward never really got to be a child. He ruled in name while advisors controlled everything. And by the time he was 15, he was dead. Tuberculosis, likely worsened by exhaustion. His reign ended quietly, and England fell back into chaos over succession, because, of course it did. Now let's gently float toward royal marriages, because this is where things truly unravel. Royal marriages were rarely about love. They were treaties, deals, political chess moves. Teenagers were married off to strangers they barely spoke the language of. Imagine being 14, sent to a foreign country, married to someone you'd never met, and told your primary purpose was to produce heirs. No pressure. Take Marie Antoinette. She was born an Austrian archduchess, one of many children, not particularly important until suddenly she was. At 14, she was married to Louis XVI of France. She left her family behind, her language, her identity. She arrived in Versailles, a palace filled with ritual, gossip, and silent judgment. Her marriage was famously unconsummated for years, which led to endless speculation, rumors, mockery. Marie was lonely, immature, and desperate for comfort, so she spent money on dresses, on parties, on distractions, which history later used against her. She became a symbol of excess, even when she didn't fully understand the system she was trapped in. Louis XVI, meanwhile, was awkward, indecisive, and deeply anxious.
Not exactly a power couple. Their story ends badly, very badly. But we won't rush there. This is supposed to be calming. Let's instead drift back toward the general emotional state of monarchs. Many were isolated, surrounded by servants, but starved for genuine connection. Everyone wanted something from them: land, titles, favors. Trust was dangerous, paranoia was practical, love was optional. Some kings coped with retreating inward, others by lashing out. Take King George III of Britain. He is often remembered for losing the American colonies, but his personal life was marked by periods of mental illness. He suffered from episodes of confusion, incoherent speech, erratic behavior. For years, historians debated the cause: porphyria, bipolar disorder, something else entirely. Whatever it was, it terrified those around him. Imagine being surrounded by courtiers, pretending everything was fine, while the king talked for hours without stopping, or believed he was speaking to angels. Eventually, he was declared unfit to rule. His son took over as regent, and George lived out his final years blind, deaf, and isolated. Once again, a crown that promised power ended in quiet confinement. Now let's gently float toward one last royal theme for tonight: spoiled adulthood. Some monarchs were not sickly, not traumatized. They were simply never told no. Take Caligula, Roman emperor, famously unstable. As a child, he grew up in military camps, surrounded by soldiers who adored him. They dressed him in tiny armor, called him Little Boots, It was cute, until it wasn't. When he became emperor, Caligula reportedly indulged every impulse: cruelty, excess, absurdity. He humiliated senators, spent fortunes, possibly declared his horse a consul, because why not? Absolute power with no boundaries rarely ends well, and usually ends violently. But again, we're not focusing on that, just the pattern. Royal children raised without limits often grew into adults without restraint, and history recorded the consequences. As we drift toward the end of this part, let everything blur together again. The cradles, the crowns, the quiet rooms filled with expectation. These kings and queens were not myths, they were people. People shaped by strange childhoods, isolated lives, and systems that rewarded bloodlines over well-being. In the next part, we'll continue floating through royal lives that slowly unraveled, queens who disappeared into obscurity, and monarchs who ruled everything except themselves. For now, rest. Let the past soften. The palace lights are dimming. If you nodded off for a moment, that's completely fine. History doesn't mind waiting. Let's settle in again and keep drifting. Up to now, we've talked about sickly kings, fragile heirs, and children who never stood a chance. Now we're moving into adulthood, because something strange happens when royal children grow up. They're finally powerful, but still deeply unequipped to handle it. They inherit crowns, not coping skills. Let's start softly, with queens who slowly faded rather than exploded. Take Isabella of Valois. She was born a French princess, married to Richard II of England at just 6 years old. 6. She was sent to a foreign country before she could properly read. Her marriage was symbolic, of course, but her life was not. She grew up surrounded by English courtiers who spoke another language, watched a husband she barely knew spiral into paranoia and cruelty. When Richard was overthrown and murdered, Isabella was just a teenager, widowed, politically inconvenient. She was sent back to France, married again, and then quietly disappeared from history. No dramatic downfall, no great legacy, just another royal woman shaped by decisions she never made. Now let's drift east again, toward Austria, and one of the most emotionally confusing royal figures of all time, Empress Elizabeth of Austria, better known as Sisi. Sisi was beautiful, famously so. Poets adored her, painters chased her, but she hated court life, despised protocol, felt suffocated by expectations. She married Emperor Franz Joseph at 16. He loved her deeply. She felt trapped. She struggled with eating disorders, obsessed over her appearance, spent hours exercising and dieting. She avoided her children, traveled constantly.
Refused to be present. Court life felt like a cage to her, and despite being empress, she never felt in control. Her life ended suddenly, assassinated by a stranger, but long before that moment, she had already withdrawn. A queen who ruled on paper, but lived emotionally elsewhere. Now let's float back toward England again, because England had a king who simply opted out. Edward VIII. Edward was charming, popular, modern. He was supposed to be the future of the monarchy, and then he fell in love with Wallis Simpson, an American, divorced, twice, which to the British establishment was unacceptable. Edward was told he could be king or he could marry her. He chose her and abdicated the throne, which sounds romantic, and maybe it was, but it also revealed something important. Edward had never wanted the responsibility, never wanted the role. He wanted affection, freedom, things monarchy rarely offers. So he stepped away and spent the rest of his life drifting, socially prominent but politically irrelevant. Sometimes the darkest truth isn't cruelty, it's quiet dissatisfaction. Now let's drift into something even quieter: royal boredom. Because many monarchs didn't go mad or cruel or tragic, they were just bored out of their minds. Take King Louis XV of France. He inherited the throne as a child, grew up surrounded by luxury. By adulthood, ruling felt tedious, so he retreated into private pleasures, mistresses, hunting, endless distractions. Government? Delegated. Problems? Postponed. By the time he died, France was financially ruined. Public trust was gone. But Louis himself? Mostly just tired and deeply detached. That detachment would echo, loudly, into the French Revolution. But again, we're not rushing. Let's drift instead toward queens who were feared. Take Catherine the Great of Russia. She was intelligent, ambitious, strategic. She overthrew her own husband to take the throne, which sounds impressive, but her marriage had been miserable. Her husband was unstable, cruel. Catherine learned quickly that power was the only protection. She ruled firmly, expanded the empire, but she also surrounded herself with lovers, young ones, because emotional intimacy was something she'd been denied early. And when you mix absolute power with personal loneliness, you get complicated behavior. Catherine was not evil, but she was not gentle. She understood control better than affection. Now let's float toward a king who believed he was chosen by God, Charles I of England. Charles believed deeply in divine right, that kings were appointed by God, which made compromise unnecessary. He ruled stubbornly, ignored parliament, dismissed criticism. Eventually, this led to civil war, and Charles lost. He was tried, convicted, executed. A king, publicly executed by his own people. It shocked Europe, but it also showed something important. Believing you are divinely chosen does not protect you from reality. Now let's slow everything down again. Royal women often survived by disappearing emotionally. Royal men often survived by hardening. Neither option led to happiness. Take Queen Victoria. She ruled for decades. She married Prince Albert, loved him deeply. When he died, she collapsed inward. She wore black for the rest of her life, avoided public appearances, clung to memory. Her grief defined her reign. And while she ruled an empire, she remained emotionally frozen in one moment of loss. Now let's gently float toward royal health, because crowns were heavy and medicine was not great. Many monarchs were addicted to something: opium, alcohol, laudanum. Take Frederick the Great of Prussia. Brilliant military mind, cold personality. As a young man, he loved music and philosophy. His father hated that, preferred discipline and cruelty.
Frederick was beaten, humiliated. One of his closest friends was executed in front of him. Later, as king, Frederick became emotionally distant, a work machine. He never married, never trusted deeply. He played the flute alone at night, a king who conquered territory by day and retreated into music by night. Now, let's pause here for a moment. Imagine all these figures together. Different countries, different centuries, but the same pattern: isolation, expectation, emotional deprivation. The crown didn't create monsters, it created pressure, and pressure revealed cracks. Some cracked loudly, some quietly,
Some simply faded away. As we drift toward the end of this part, let the stories blur again. Silk dresses, heavy robes, empty bedrooms. Kings and queens standing alone in grand rooms, listening to echoes of power, with no one to speak honestly to. In the next part, we'll float into the most uncomfortable royal truth of all. Dynasties that collapsed not because of enemies, but because they rotted from within. For now, rest. The palace is quiet again. If your thoughts wandered off for a bit, that's perfectly fine. These stories have been wandering for centuries. Let's keep moving, gently, into the long, quiet decline of royal families who looked powerful right until they weren't. Because most dynasties don't collapse in one dramatic moment. They sag, they fray, they quietly stop working. Let's begin with a family that ruled Russia for over 300 years, the Romanovs. They started strong, sturdy, authoritative. But by the time we reach the final Romanovs, everything feels tired. Nicholas II was not a cruel man, and that, unfortunately, was part of the problem. He was gentle, shy, and deeply devoted to his family, which sounds lovely until you remember he was ruling a massive empire filled with poverty, unrest, and political rage. Nicholas preferred domestic life, long walks, quiet evenings. He hated confrontation, avoided hard decisions, and when people protested, he withdrew. His wife, Alexandra, was anxious, intensely religious, and isolated. Their son, Alexei, suffered from hemophilia, a disease passed down quietly through royal bloodlines. Every small injury could be fatal. Alexandra became desperate, which is how Rasputin entered the story. A mystic, a healer, a deeply unsettling presence. Rasputin seemed to calm Alexei's symptoms, so Alexandra trusted him completely. The court whispered, the public raged, and the monarchy lost credibility. By the time revolution came, it didn't feel sudden, it felt overdue. Now let's drift westward again, back toward Spain, because Spain had another royal collapse worth quietly observing. Philip II. Philip was disciplined, hard-working, hardly religious. He ruled from his palace like a monk with an empire. He micromanaged everything: paperwork, orders, details. He believed control was stability. But empires don't like being micromanaged. Spain bled money. Wars dragged on. The Armada failed. Philip lost wives, children. His personal life was filled with grief, which hardened him further. And while he ruled relentlessly, Spain slowly declined under the weight of endless ambition. Now let's float toward a quieter kind of collapse, the Holy Roman Empire. Technically an empire, barely holy, not Roman, and rarely united. It was a patchwork of territories held together by titles, marriages, and tradition. Emperors spent more time negotiating than ruling. Power was symbolic, authority fragmented. By the time it dissolved in 1806, most people barely noticed. It had already been unraveling for generations. Now, let's move back to France, because France offers one of the clearest examples of dynastic decay. Louis XVI. He inherited a broken system: financial crisis, social inequality, public resentment. Louis himself was not malicious, just indecisive. He hesitated, delayed, second-guessed, and while he hesitated, anger grew.
Marie Antoinette became the target, foreign, visible, easy to blame. The monarchy lost touch with reality, and when revolution came, it swept everything away. The crown, the titles, the illusion of permanence. What's striking isn't how violent the end was, but how disconnected the rulers were beforehand. They simply didn't understand the world outside their palace walls anymore. Now let's drift into another quiet truth. Royal systems depended on continuity, on heirs, on stability, and when heirs were weak, or absent, or unprepared, everything wobbled. Take the Qing dynasty in China. By the 19th century, emperors were isolated behind ritual and tradition. Real power often rested with regents or court officials. Change was resisted. Foreign pressure mounted. The system froze while the world moved on. Eventually,
Free, which might be the closest thing to happiness monarchy ever allowed. Now let's float toward France again. After the Revolution, royalty didn't vanish. They just became awkward. Former nobles lived quietly. Some fled, some stayed. Titles became liabilities. Marie Antoinette's surviving daughter, Marie-Thérèse, lived a long life in exile. She witnessed the execution of her parents, imprisonment, loss, and spent decades drifting through European courts. She never fully recovered. Her identity was built on a crown that no longer existed. Imagine carrying that weight with nowhere to put it down. Now let's slow things further. What about kings who retired? Very few did, but when they did, it was strange. Take Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. He ruled vast territories, Spain, the Netherlands, parts of Italy. Exhausted, physically and mentally, he abdicated and retreated to a monastery. There he lived quietly, obsessed with clocks. He collected them, listened to them tick, trying, perhaps, to control time after a lifetime of trying to control everything else. Now let's talk about something history rarely admits. Many monarchs were relieved when it ended, relieved to stop pretending, relieved to stop performing. Take Wilhelm II of Germany. He was bombastic, insecure, loud. When World War I ended and he abdicated, he fled to the Netherlands. There he lived out his life chopping wood, complaining, writing bitter letters. No army, no throne, just a former emperor with a lot of opinions and time to think, which is not always a gift. Now let's float towards something even quieter. Ordinary deaths. Most famous kings and queens didn't die dramatically. They died of infections, strokes, old age, in beds, surrounded by servants, or sometimes alone. Take King Louis-Philippe of France. After being overthrown, he lived in England under a false name. He died quietly, a former king, barely noticed. History moved on. Now let's slow everything down again, because here's the darkest truth of all. After the crowns were gone, after the palaces emptied, after the rituals stopped, many of these people were just people, aging, ailing, remembering. They replayed old decisions, regretted words, missed moments. The power that once defined them no longer protected them from time. Now let's drift toward memory. How history remembers kings and queens often has very little to do with who they actually were. Some are romanticized, others demonized. Details blur, simplify, complex lives reduced to anecdotes. Henry VIII becomes wives, Marie Antoinette becomes cake, Caligula becomes madness, and the quiet moments vanish. The loneliness, the fear, the exhaustion, those rarely survive.
Now imagine for a moment all of them together. No crowns, no titles, just people sitting quietly. Some regretful, some proud, some confused, most tired. The crown promised immortality, but delivered memory, and memory is selective. As we drift toward the end of this part, let everything soften again. Palace walls dissolve, thrones gather dust, the people remain, briefly, and then they fade. In the next and final part, we'll gently wrap this all together, not with conclusions, not with lessons, just with the quiet understanding that behind every famous king and queen was a human being doing their best, or sometimes just surviving. For now, rest. History has almost finished whispering.
It collapsed, not because emperors were evil, but because the structure could no longer adapt. Now let's slow down even more. One of the darkest truths about famous kings and queens is how often they were simply placeholders, symbols, faces on coins. Real decisions were made elsewhere, councils, advisors, courtiers, which meant blame fell upward. When things went wrong, the crown took the hit, and when things went right, the system took credit. A deeply thankless arrangement. Now let's float toward a royal woman who ruled but was never fully accepted. Cleopatra. She was intelligent, multilingual, politically sharp, but history often reduces her to romance, which is convenient and inaccurate. Cleopatra ruled in a collapsing world, caught between Rome's power struggles. She aligned herself with Caesar, then Antony, not for love alone, but survival. When Rome won, she lost, and her dynasty ended with her, not because she failed, but because the era had shifted. Now let's pause again. Look at all these endings. Very few involve peaceful retirement or quiet satisfaction. Most end in exile, confinement, execution, or irrelevance. The crown promised permanence, but delivered impermanence. Now let's gently approach something even more uncomfortable: legacy. Many kings and queens believed history would remember them kindly. Some commissioned portraits, monuments, statues. They controlled narratives while alive, but after death, history became less polite. Nicknames stuck, failures lingered, bloody, mad, weak. Centuries of complexity reduced to a single word, and sometimes that word isn't fair. Now let's slow the rhythm again. Imagine the final moments of these rulers. A quiet room, a fading body, no crowds, no trumpets, just breath. At the end, the crown doesn't matter, only the human underneath it, and most of them were tired. As we drift toward the end of this part, let the dynasties blur together. Names fade, dates soften. What remains is the pattern. Absolute power isolates, tradition traps, bloodlines weaken, and even the most famous kings and queens were never as secure as they looked. In the next part, we'll settle into the quietest truth of all: what happened after the crowns were gone, and how ordinary the endings really were. For now, rest. The palace halls are empty. Or welcome back again. Or maybe you never really left. That's the nice thing about these stories. They don't rush you. Up to now, we've watched crowns crack, dynasties sag, and entire systems quietly give up. Now we arrive at something softer, and in some ways, stranger. What happens after the power disappears? because history loves the rise and it loves the fall, but it rarely lingers on the aftermath. The years when former kings wake up without authority, when queens realize no one is listening anymore, when titles still exist but mean almost nothing. Let's start gently with exile. Exile was the favorite solution of history, less messy than execution, more humiliating than death. Take Napoleon Bonaparte. Yes, technically an emperor, but still very much part of the same tradition. Napoleon rose fast, ruled aggressively, conquered loudly, and then lost. He was exiled to Elba, a small island, quiet, contained. For a man who once controlled armies, this felt unbearable. He escaped, returned, ruled again, briefly, then lost again. This time he was sent to St. Helena, remote, isolated. There Napoleon paced, argued with his captors, complained endlessly. He dictated memoirs, replayed old glories, a former emperor reduced to memories and a lot of opinions. Power, once tasted, is very hard to forget. Now let's drift back to royal women, because their endings were often quieter and sadder. Take Queen Christina of Sweden. She was brilliant, educated, independent. She hated marriage, despised expectation, and eventually she abdicated, just walked away. She converted to Catholicism, left Sweden, traveled Europe. She lived among artists and philosophers, argued loudly, spent money recklessly. No longer a queen, but still unmistakably royal in attitude. Her life after the crown was unconventional, messy.
We've drifted through palaces, bloodlines, collapses, and afterlives. We've watched crowns get heavier, and people get smaller beneath them. So now we slow everything down even more, because this is where history stops being loud. This is where it exhales. When you strip away the titles, the robes, the portraits meant to impress, what's left behind is surprisingly ordinary. Most kings and queens were not monsters, and they were not heroes. They were people placed into systems that demanded too much, too early, for too long. Take the idea of divine right, being told from birth that God chose you. It sounds empowering, but it's also isolating. If everything you do is divinely justified, then mistakes become terrifying. There's no room to be wrong, no space to doubt. And doubt, when it has nowhere to go, turns inward. That's how you get paranoia, rigidity, cruel certainty, or complete withdrawal. Many monarchs weren't cruel because they wanted to be. They were cruel because softness felt dangerous. Others weren't weak by nature. They were exhausted. Imagine never clocking out, never being off stage, never knowing if affection is real or strategic. That wears on a person. Even the most powerful monarchs slept lightly, trusted few, aged quickly, and most of them died feeling unfinished. There's another quiet truth history rarely emphasizes. Royal life was repetitive. Ceremonies, audiences, meals eaten at fixed times, the same halls, the same faces, the same expectations, day after day, year after year. Boredom wasn't a flaw, it was a condition. And boredom mixed with absolute power leads to strange behavior. Extravagance, obsessions, excess. Not because they were uniquely flawed, but because they had nowhere else to put their energy.
Now think about legacy. Many kings and queens obsessed over it, built monuments, commissioned paintings. They wanted to be remembered as strong, wise, beloved. But legacy doesn't belong to the dead. It belongs to the living. And the living simplify. They flatten complexity. They choose symbols. So Henry becomes tyranny. Elizabeth becomes strength. Louis becomes decadence. The real people, with doubts and quiet evenings and small regrets, disappear. That might be the cruelest part of monarchy. Not the executions, not the exiles, but the erasure of the human beneath the crown. Now let's do something history doesn't often allow. Let's imagine them alone. No audience, no courtiers, just a room, a chair, a former king rubbing his hands together, remembering a decision he never quite got right. A former queen staring out a window, wondering who she might have been without the weight of a title. These moments existed even if they weren't recorded. And they matter because they remind us of something simple.
Power doesn't eliminate fear. It concentrates it. Tradition doesn't create stability. It delays collapse. And bloodlines don't guarantee greatness. They just repeat patterns. Most famous kings and queens didn't fail because they were evil. They failed because the system expected perfection from flawed humans. And that system eventually breaks, every time. Now let everything gently blur one last time. Crowns melting into shadow, names fading into dates. What remains is the quiet truth. History isn't made by titles, it's lived by people. People who got tired, people who made mistakes, people who tried to hold together worlds that were already changing. And in the end, they slept, just like you're about to. No crown on the pillow, no scepter by the bed, just silence. Thanks for drifting through history tonight. You don't need to remember any of it. Let it fade. Let it soften. The past will still be there tomorrow. For now, good night. Hey, it's okay if you thought that was the end. History likes pretending it's finished and then quietly continuing anyway. So let's keep drifting, very gently. No new intensity, no big revelations, just the soft echo that lingers after the crown is already off the table. Because even when kings and queens were gone, their choices kept moving, slowly, like waves after a stone sinks. Empires didn't end cleanly. They left habits behind, borders, traditions, grudges, all inherited by people who never asked for them. Let's think about the children of former monarchs, not heirs, not rulers, just descendants. Many lived strange, half-royal lives, too important to be ordinary, too irrelevant to matter. They carried famous names that opened doors and closed others. Some became artists, some soldiers, some wandered, always introduced as former something. That's a heavy identity to wear forever. Now drift toward the servants. They're rarely mentioned, but they saw everything. The aging king who needed help standing, the queen who cried quietly after court. Servants watched power decay in real time. They didn't write memoirs, they didn't commission portraits, they just remembered. And those memories often vanished with them. Now let's float toward the palaces themselves. Versailles, the Winter Palace, the Forbidden City. After the rulers left, the buildings remained, echoing, too large. Tourists walked through rooms once filled with fear and ceremony. Photos replaced rituals, souvenirs replaced power. History became aesthetic, which is a strange kind of afterlife.
Now think about how modern people talk about kings and queens. Lists, rankings, best, worst. It's neat, comforting. But real lives are not neat. Henry VIII didn't wake up thinking, "Today I'll become a cautionary tale." Marie Antoinette didn't plan to become a symbol. They were just moving forward one day at a time, like everyone else. That's the unsettling part. History's villains rarely know they're villains, and its failures often thought they were holding things together. Now let's slow this down even more. Imagine time passing without names, no dates, no titles, just seasons. Winter in a drafty palace, summer heat trapped in stone walls, illness, recovery, aging. These cycles didn't care about crowns. They treated kings the same way they treated farmers. Time is very democratic, and eventually it wins. Now let's return to one last quiet pattern. Many monarchs clung to routine near the end. Same meals, same walks, same prayers. Routine was control when control was slipping away. That's very human, not royal, human. Which brings us back to the simplest truth of all. The dark truth behind famous kings and queens isn't blood or madness or decadence. It's fragility. Fragility wrapped in ceremony. Fragility amplified by power. They were never gods. They were never myths. They were people trying to survive roles
that outgrew them. Now let the images dissolve completely. No thrones, no banners, just quiet. History isn't asking you to remember it tonight. It's asking you to rest. The kings and queens are done speaking. The halls are dark. The candles are out. If your thoughts drift now, that's exactly right. Nothing more is required. Good night. If your eyelids are already heavy, perfect. We're going to drift even slower now. Most people imagine kings and queens surrounded by people all the time. Crowds, courtiers, flattering voices. But the reality? Monarchs were often profoundly alone. They couldn't speak freely. Every word could be misinterpreted. Every gesture was scrutinized. Take Queen Anne of England. She had 17 pregnancies, but only one child survived infancy. She lost close family constantly. Her friends died. Her confidants died. And Anne was constantly ill herself. Even surrounded by attendants, she was lonely. Every compliment had an agenda. Every touch measured. The weight of expectation is a strange thing. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It presses down like an invisible stone. Kings and queens learned to fill silence with ritual. Long meals, formal prayers, endless audiences. And sometimes they would weep privately. No one knew. No one cared. That quiet loneliness is a legacy of the crown. Now let's drift toward a pattern you've probably noticed. Many monarchs became obsessed with control, with perfection, with keeping things exactly as they were. Take Louis XIV of France, the Sun King. He spent decades centralizing power, micromanaging his nobles, and making Versailles the world's largest stage. Why? Because chaos terrified him. He had seen rebellion in childhood, and so he controlled everything: court ceremonies, daily schedules, even how people walked and talked. Peter the Great in Russia did something similar, though more physically intense. He forced nobles to learn shipbuilding. He made them shave their beards. He reformed laws at night while pacing endlessly.
These rulers didn't always enjoy power. They were haunted by the responsibility it carried. And when you have absolute power, tiny annoyances become obsessions. Every misstep, every delay, every whisper of dissent magnifies. The pattern repeats. Control is a shield, but behind it, vulnerability always waits. If you've ever wondered what kings and queens did when no one was looking, well, the answer is often strange. Empress Elizabeth of Austria, Sisi, spent hours exercising and obsessively measuring her waist. Queen Victoria clung to mourning clothes for decades. Frederick the Great of Prussia retreated to his flute at night. These habits were ways to reclaim control, or comfort themselves, or simply make the long, lonely hours pass. Even something like King George III's obsessive attention to his gardens, or Napoleon meticulously planning meals, or Catherine the Great cataloging her library, reveals a quiet human truth. Power is heavy, and when the world doesn't offer relief, small rituals feel monumental. These seemingly trivial routines often mattered more than armies, taxes, or treaties, and they were always personal, always fragile. Monarchs were expected to be symbols, strong, unyielding, brilliant, divine even. But private lives were often the opposite. Charles VI of France, the Mad King, suffered from extreme mental illness. He couldn't distinguish reality sometimes. He even froze in place for hours. Yet public appearances required calm, masks of stability. Courtiers flattered him endlessly to keep him functioning. Similarly, Marie Antoinette had to smile in public while enduring humiliation and loss in private. Every gesture, every word, scrutinized. The crown amplifies fragility. It never hides it. It just dresses it up with ceremony. And that's the quiet, dark truth. Under the gilded robes, under the jewels, most monarchs were delicate, tired humans. Time does not care about crowns. It does not care about lineage. It does not care about power. Eventually, the king dies. The queen dies. The palace empties. And all the ceremonies, all the pomp, fade into quiet. The descendants may carry a name, but they rarely inherit the human experience of ruling. And history?
It remembers some things, forgets others. Henry VIII becomes wives. Caligula becomes chaos. Elizabeth I becomes legend. But the small, private moments vanish. The loneliness, the fears, the tiny triumphs of surviving another day. Even in the most famous dynasties, human beings, flawed, fragile, exhausted, slipped quietly out of view. That's the story you carry with you tonight. Power is ephemeral. Courage is quiet. And the truest histories are whispered, not shouted. So close your eyes, let these echoes fade, and drift into sleep. The palaces are dark now, the rulers are resting, and history keeps whispering. Not all kings and queens are famous. Some are almost invisible. And that's the part of monarchy no one talks about. Take James III of Scotland, sometimes called James the Restless. He wasn't terrible. He wasn't cruel. He just failed. Failed at connecting with his nobles. Failed at managing rebellions. Failed at securing his throne. He ended up dying in battle, overthrown by the very people who were supposed to support him. Not dramatically, not heroically, just quietly, painfully, lost. Or consider Mary, Queen of Scots. She ruled Scotland. She was a symbol of Catholic hope in a Protestant world. She was beautiful, charismatic, and yet politics and personal misfortune conspired against her. She lost allies. She lost her husband. She lost her freedom. Eventually, she lost her head. The dramatic deaths are easy to remember. The slow, quiet failures are harder. But they tell the same story. Power is delicate. Courage alone does not suffice. Luck matters. Timing matters. And sometimes, no matter what you do, it's simply not enough. Now drift east again, toward Japan. The emperors of Japan ruled for centuries, often with little real power. During the Edo period, the shoguns controlled the land while the emperor became a symbol. Imagine wearing a crown, never speaking in law or politics, existing as an icon watched by thousands, and still powerless. It's not tragic, it's quietly frustrating. And yet, these quiet, almost invisible monarchs survived. Some peacefully, some in obscurity. They remind us that royalty isn't always about glory. It's often endurance. Endurance of expectation, ritual, and sometimes complete irrelevance. Because if there's one thing history is full of, it's odd habits. Not scandalous or sensational, just quietly peculiar. Take Charles VI of France, the Mad King we mentioned earlier. His eccentricities weren't always violent or extreme. Sometimes he simply believed he was made of glass. He would refuse to be touched, walk carefully, avoid any sudden movements. Courtiers tiptoed around him. The palace became a sort of absurd, silent ballet. It wasn't cruelty, it was paranoia, a deeply human response to pressure and instability. Or consider Queen Christina of Sweden, who abdicated her throne. She refused to marry, dressed in men's clothing, surrounded herself with philosophers and artists. Odd, yes. Rebellious? Absolutely. Lonely? Almost certainly. Eccentricity, it seems, was a safe outlet, a way to assert individuality when every other choice was dictated by birthright. Even kings with grand armies sometimes retreated into private quirks. Peter the Great of Russia, for instance, would spend hours inspecting his shipyards and learning carpentry. He wore shoes that didn't match sometimes just to amuse himself. Or maybe no one really knows why. And then there was Frederick the Great of Prussia, a military genius who loved his flute and poetry more than his soldiers. He spent nights alone practicing music while the empire slept. In all these cases, eccentricity habits were survival strategies. Small acts of control in otherwise uncontrollable lives. Now let's drift east again, toward Japan. The emperors in Japan ruled for centuries, often with little real power. During the Edo period, the shoguns controlled the land while the emperor became a symbol. Imagine wearing a crown, never speaking in law or politics, existing as an icon watched by thousands, and still powerless. It's not tragic, it's quietly frustrating. And yet, these quiet, almost invisible monarchs survived. Some peacefully, some in obscurity. They remind us that royalty isn't always about glory. It's often endurance. Endurance of expectation, ritual, and sometimes complete irrelevance. Because if there's one thing history is full of, it's odd habits. Not scandalous or sensational, just quietly peculiar. Take Charles VI of France, the mad king we mentioned earlier. His eccentricities weren't always violent or extreme. Sometimes he simply believed he was made of glass. He would refuse to be touched, walk carefully, avoid any sudden movements. Courtiers tiptoed around him. The palace became a sort of absurd, silent ballet. It wasn't cruelty, it was paranoia, a deeply human response to pressure and instability. Or consider Queen Christina of Sweden, who abdicated her throne. She refused to marry, dressed in men's clothing, surrounded herself with philosophers and artists. Odd, yes. Rebellious? Absolutely. Lonely? Almost certainly. Eccentricity, it seems, was a safe outlet, a way to assert individuality when every other choice was dictated by birthright. Even kings with grand armies sometimes retreated into private quirks. Peter the Great of Russia, for instance, would spend hours inspecting his shipyards and learning carpentry. He wore shoes that didn't match sometimes just to amuse himself. Or maybe no one really knows why. And then there was Frederick the Great of Prussia, a military genius who loved his flute and poetry more than his soldiers. He spent nights alone practicing music while the empire slept. In all these cases, eccentricity habits were survival strategies. Small acts of control in otherwise uncontrollable lives. Now let's drift east again, toward Japan. The emperors of Japan ruled for centuries, often with little real power. During the Edo period, the shoguns controlled the land while the emperor became a symbol. Imagine wearing a crown, never speaking in law or politics, existing as an icon watched by thousands, and still powerless. It's not tragic, it's quietly frustrating. And yet, these quiet, almost invisible monarchs survived. Some peacefully, some in obscurity. They remind us that royalty isn't always about glory. It's often endurance. Endurance of expectation, ritual, and sometimes complete irrelevance. Because if there's one thing history is full of, it's odd habits. Not scandalous or sensational, just quietly peculiar. Take Charles VI of France, the mad king we mentioned earlier. His eccentricities weren't always violent or extreme. Sometimes he simply believed he was made of glass. He would refuse to be touched, walk carefully, avoid any sudden movements. Courtiers tiptoed around him. The palace became a sort of absurd, silent ballet. It wasn't cruelty, it was paranoia.
It remembers some things, forgets others. Henry VIII becomes wives. Caligula becomes chaos. Elizabeth I becomes legend. But the small, private moments vanish. The loneliness, the fears, the tiny triumphs of surviving another day. Even in the most famous dynasties, human beings, flawed, fragile, exhausted, slipped quietly out of view. That's the story you carry with you tonight. Power is ephemeral. Courage is quiet. And the truest histories are whispered, not shouted. So close your eyes. Let these echoes fade
and drift into sleep. The palaces are dark now, the rulers are resting, and history keeps whispering. Not all kings and queens are famous. Some are almost invisible. And that's the part of monarchy no one talks about. Take James III of Scotland, sometimes called James the Restless. He wasn't terrible. He wasn't cruel. He just failed. Failed at connecting with his nobles. Failed at managing rebellions. Failed at securing his throne. He ended up dying in battle, overthrown by the very people who were supposed to support him. Not dramatically, not heroically, just quietly, painfully, lost. Or consider Mary, Queen of Scots. She ruled Scotland. She was a symbol of Catholic hope in a Protestant world. She was beautiful, charismatic, and yet politics and personal misfortune conspired against her. She lost allies. She lost her husband. She lost her freedom. Eventually, she lost her head. The dramatic deaths are easy to remember. The slow, quiet failures are harder. But they tell the same story. Power is delicate. Courage alone does not suffice. Luck matters. Timing matters. And sometimes, no matter what you do, it's simply not enough. Now drift east again, toward Japan. The emperors of Japan ruled for centuries, often with little real power. During the Edo period, the shoguns controlled the land while the emperor became a symbol. Imagine wearing a crown, never speaking in law or politics, existing as an icon watched by thousands, and still powerless. It's not tragic, it's quietly frustrating. And yet, these quiet, almost invisible monarchs survived. Some peacefully, some in obscurity. They remind us that royalty isn't always about glory. It's often endurance. Endurance of expectation, ritual, and sometimes complete irrelevance. Because if there's one thing history is full of, it's odd habits. Not scandalous or sensational, just quietly peculiar. Take Charles VI of France, the Mad King we mentioned earlier. His eccentricities weren't always violent or extreme. Sometimes he simply believed he was made of glass. He would refuse to be touched, walk carefully, avoid any sudden movements. Courtiers tiptoed around him. The palace became a sort of absurd, silent ballet. It wasn't cruelty, it was paranoia, a deeply human response to pressure and instability. Or consider Queen Christina of Sweden, who abdicated her throne. She refused to marry, dressed in men's clothing, surrounded herself with philosophers and artists. Odd, yes. Rebellious, absolutely. Lonely, almost certainly. Eccentricity, it seems, was a safe outlet, a way to assert individuality when every other choice was dictated by birthright. Even kings with grand armies sometimes retreated into private quirks. Peter the Great of Russia, for instance, would spend hours inspecting his shipyards and learning carpentry. He wore shoes that didn't match sometimes just to amuse himself. Or maybe no one really knows why. And then there was Frederick the Great of Prussia, a military genius who loved his flute and poetry more than his soldiers. He spent nights alone practicing music while the empire slept. In all these cases,
eccentricity habits were survival strategies, small acts of control in otherwise uncontrollable lives. Now let's drift east again, toward Japan. The emperors in Japan ruled for centuries, often with little real power. During the Edo period, the shoguns controlled the land while the emperor became a symbol. Imagine wearing a crown, never speaking in law or politics, existing as an icon watched by thousands, and still powerless. It's not tragic, it's quietly frustrating. And yet, these quiet, almost invisible monarchs survived. Some peacefully, some in obscurity. They remind us that royalty isn't always about glory. It's often endurance. Endurance of expectation, ritual, and sometimes complete irrelevance. Because if there's one thing history is full of, it's odd habits. Not scandalous or sensational, just quietly peculiar. Take Charles VI of France, the mad king we mentioned earlier. His eccentricities weren't always violent or extreme. Sometimes he simply believed he was made of glass. He would refuse to be touched, walk carefully, avoid any sudden movements. Courtiers tiptoed around him. The palace became a sort of absurd, silent ballet. It wasn't cruelty, it was paranoia, a deeply human response to pressure and instability. Or consider Queen Christina of Sweden, who abdicated her throne. She refused to marry, dressed in men's clothing, surrounded herself with philosophers and artists. Odd, yes. Rebellious? Absolutely. Lonely? Almost certainly. Eccentricity, it seems, was a safe outlet, a way to assert individuality when every other choice was dictated by birthright. Even kings with grand armies sometimes retreated into private quirks. Peter the Great of Russia, for instance, would spend hours inspecting his shipyards and learning carpentry. He wore shoes that didn't match sometimes just to amuse himself. Or maybe no one really knows why. And then there was Frederick the Great of Prussia, a military genius who loved his flute and poetry more than his soldiers. He spent nights alone practicing music while the empire slept. In all these cases, eccentricity habits were survival strategies. Small acts of control in otherwise uncontrollable lives. Now let's drift east again, toward Japan. The emperors of Japan ruled for centuries, often with little real power. During the Edo period, the shoguns controlled the land while the emperor became a symbol. Imagine wearing a crown, never speaking in law or politics, existing as an icon watched by thousands, and still powerless. It's not tragic, it's quietly frustrating. And yet, these quiet, almost invisible monarchs survived. Some peacefully, some in obscurity. They remind us that royalty isn't always about glory. It's often endurance. Endurance of expectation, ritual, and sometimes complete irrelevance. Because if there's one thing history is full of, it's odd habits. Not scandalous or sensational, just quietly peculiar. Take Charles VI of France, the mad king we mentioned earlier. His eccentricities weren't always violent or extreme. Sometimes he simply believed he was made of glass. He would refuse to be touched, walk carefully, avoid any sudden movements. Courtiers tiptoed around him. The palace became a sort of absurd, silent ballet. It wasn't cruelty,
It was paranoia.
Sometimes the disaster isn't violent. It's slow attrition, mismanagement, isolation, death by neglect. And the most striking part? The royals rarely realized their empires were crumbling until it was almost too late. Now let's float to Japan. The Kamakura and Muromachi shogunates show a similar quiet decay. Power became fragmented. Shoguns controlled less. Ceremonies persisted. The people watched silently as authority faded. Even in dynasties that survived centuries, the cracks were often visible only in hindsight. The lesson is subtle. Empires crumble not always because of wars, but because the people at the top are human. They get tired, they make mistakes, they love poorly, and history waits patiently to catch them. Next, we'll drift toward monarchs who survived disasters but were forever haunted by them. History often praises bold choices, but what about the choices that backfired? The ones that quietly, persistently haunted their makers? Take Napoleon Bonaparte again. He conquered much of Europe, redrew maps, imposed laws, and yet his exile on Elba wasn't the end. His return to power ended in defeat at Waterloo. Every day on St. Helena, he replayed battles, treaties, and speeches, not dramatically, not with rage, just quietly, obsessing over what went wrong. Or consider Louis XVI of France. He hesitated to reform. He tried compromise. He attempted moderation in a revolutionary storm. And yet, history remembered him as indecisive. For monarchs, decisions are permanent. There is rarely a reset button. Every misstep echoes through decades, through families, through nations. Even when rulers survived crises, they were often haunted. Queen Victoria lost her beloved husband Albert in 1861. She mourned for the rest of her life. She withdrew from public life. Court and country continued, but she was trapped in her grief. Sometimes the haunting isn't public. Sometimes it's entirely personal. Take Charles VI of France again. The mad king spent years terrified of invisible dangers. When he recovered from bouts of illness, he had to reconcile the destruction wrought in his absence. For many monarchs, life after crisis wasn't relief. It was the quiet burden of choices, mistakes, and survival. And that's one of the quietest truths of monarchy. Even immense power doesn't free you from memory, from regret, from the slow pressure of your own decisions. Next, we'll drift toward monarchs who tried to escape this burden through exile, abdication, or retirement. Their stories are quieter, but perhaps more relatable than any throne. Some monarchs, faced with the weight of crowns and the mistakes of their reigns, chose to leave, not dramatically, not heroically, just quietly. Take Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. He ruled vast territories, Spain, the Netherlands, parts of Italy, and the title of emperor itself. And then he abdicated. Not because he lost a battle or was overthrown, he simply got tired, retired to a monastery, spent his remaining years quietly, obsessing over clocks and prayer. Or Queen Christina of Sweden, who abdicated in the 17th century. She left the throne to pursue freedom, traveling, engaging with artists, converting religions. She traded ceremony for personal autonomy. And that autonomy was both liberating and isolating. Even Napoleon tried retreat twice, first to Elba, and then, after Waterloo, to St. Helena, where he paced, dictated memoirs, and obsessed over the Europe he had once dominated. Exile is often framed as punishment, but for some it became refuge, a way to step away from public scrutiny, from endless decisions, from history itself. And sometimes abdication wasn't even about escape, it was survival. Wilhelm II of Germany, after World War I, fled to the Netherlands. He chopped wood, wrote bitter letters, and lived quietly. The empire was gone, the title meaningless, and yet he endured. Even in abdication and exile, patterns repeat. Monarchs cling to routines. They obsess over small details. They replay memories. And in the quiet, perhaps they finally felt a bit human again. The crown doesn't always end in tragedy. Sometimes it ends in stillness, a stillness that strangely can be comforting. Next, we'll drift into the final part, a slow, soft reflection on the lives of monarchs, the lessons of history, and the fragile human truths beneath every crown. We've seen crowns rise and sag. We've watched dynasties wobble. We've drifted alongside kings and queens, haunted by their choices, exhausted by their power, and softened by mortality. And now, let's settle into the quietest truth of all. History is not made by crowns, it's made by people. People who laughed quietly behind closed doors, people who cried alone in empty halls, people who made mistakes and tried to survive them. Even the most famous monarchs, Napoleon, Elizabeth, Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, were fragile humans. They felt fear, boredom, grief, obsession, and isolation. They loved imperfectly, they ruled imperfectly, and they eventually disappeared. Some died quietly in exile. Some died surrounded by servants in their palaces. Some died in battle. And some just faded from memory, their names barely whispered. What remains is not always the grandeur, not always the legend, but the subtle patterns, the way power isolates, the way expectation crushes, the way humans, fragile, imperfect, carry history forward. Monarchs wore crowns that weighed heavily, and we, centuries later, are left to admire, analyze, or simply remember quietly. So, as we close this long journey, let your thoughts drift. The palaces are empty now. The thrones are dark.
The rituals are gone. What remains is softness. The echo of humanity beneath gilded robes. The quiet, enduring truth that all power ends and all humans rest. You don't need to remember every name, date, or scandal. Just remember the gentle rhythm of life behind the crowns. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the history of kings and queens fade into the stillness of sleep. Good night. Tonight, we haven't chased battles or shouted names. We've wandered slowly through palaces, corridors, and quiet rooms. We've listened to the human whispers behind crowns. We've felt the weight of expectation, the subtle loneliness, the strange habits, and the fragile choices of monarchs past. And now, let's let it all dissolve. Imagine the tapestries fading, the chandeliers dimming, the echoes of footsteps slowing. Every king and queen you've met tonight, their fears, regrets, obsessions, and odd comforts merge with the quiet of history. Nothing is urgent anymore. No audience waits. No decision presses down. The world they ruled continues, but in this quiet, the past softens. And maybe the greatest lesson is this: power is temporary, life is fragile, history is patient. Sleep now. Let crowns fade from memory, let palaces dissolve, and let the human whispers carry you, slowly, gently, into the softest sleep. Good night. History is patient. It waits. It whispers. But now it asks nothing of you. No crowns to judge. No thrones to envy.
no dynasties to analyze. All the rulers, all the ceremonies, all the obsessions fade into stillness. You can imagine the empty corridors, the darkened halls, the quiet palace gardens where monarchs once paced, worried, and loved. The final truth is soft. Humanity is larger than power. Fragility is universal. Even the mightiest will rest. Let your thoughts drift. Let names and dates dissolve. Let history soften into silence. This is the end. Not with a bang, not with spectacle, but with the quiet, gentle exhale of time. Good night. Imagine the echoes of palaces fading completely, the courtiers gone, the kings and queens resting peacefully, their stories gently dissolving into memory. History itself now whispers in slow rhythm. No battles, no politics, no grandeur. Only the soft, enduring pulse of humanity remains, fragile, fleeting, yet persistent. And you can rest fully now. No names, no dates, no intrigue. Just stillness. Let your mind drift. Let your body relax. And let the timeless, quiet pulse of humanity carry you, slowly, gently, into the deepest sleep. Good night. All the palaces are silent. All the thrones are empty. All the crowns resting. The kings, queens, and emperors, their ambitions, fears, obsessions, and loneliness have gently faded into memory. History itself now whispers in slow rhythm. No battles, no politics, no grandeur. Only the soft, enduring pulse of humanity remains, fragile, fleeting, yet persistent. And you can rest fully now. No names, no dates, no intrigue, just stillness. Let your mind drift, let your body relax, and let the timeless, quiet pulse of humanity carry you, slowly, gently, into the deepest sleep. Good night. The castles, the corridors, and the golden halls, all dissolving into soft silence. The kings and queens, their stories, their ambitions, all resting peacefully. History no longer asks for attention. No names, no dates, no crowns, just soft, quiet human echoes lingering in memory. Even the weight of empires has faded away. Only calm remains. A gentle pulse, a slow, steady rhythm, carrying you into the deepest rest.
Let yourself go. Let the centuries fade. Let the whispers of the past dissolve and drift fully, completely into sleep. Good night. All the palaces are dark. All the crowns are resting. All the kings, queens, and emperors have finally found their peace. History no longer calls. No names, no battles, no ceremonies remain. Only a soft, patient rhythm, the gentle pulse of humanity itself. The echoes of ambition, fear, and obsession fade completely. The whispers of centuries dissolve into silence, and you can drift fully, completely, effortlessly into sleep. Time has slowed, history has softened, and now so can you. Good night. All the palaces are empty. All the corridors are quiet. The kings and queens finally at rest. History no longer demands attention.
No battles, no politics, no grandeur. Only calm remains, soft, patient, gentle, like a heartbeat slowly fading into silence. And you can drift freely now. No need to remember names, dates, or dynasties. Just breathe, just feel the stillness, and let the quiet pulse of the past carry you slowly, gently, into the deepest sleep imaginable. Time is still, history is soft, and now so can you. Good night. Because behind every golden throne and ceremonial robe, there was a person who laughed quietly when no one was watching, a person who worried about children they could barely see, a person who dreamed of freedom even as ceremonies chained them to protocol. Take Louis XIV, the Sun King. He ruled France for 72 years. Immense power rested in his hands. Armies answered his commands, and the wealth of a nation flowed toward him. Yet even he experienced loneliness, insecurity, and the heavy weight of expectation. Every ceremonial gesture was a reminder of his isolation. Even kings are human. Think of Marie Antoinette, often caricatured in history as frivolous and self-indulgent. Her life was marked by constant scrutiny, tragedy, and personal loss. She lost children, allies, and ultimately her freedom. Her lavish dresses were not always choice. They were part of a rigid court system that demanded perfection. And behind all that, a human heart, quietly enduring. Even emperors far from Europe faced similar burdens. The shoguns of Japan, though seemingly serene and ritualistic, were constantly navigating the expectations of their court and the delicate balance of power. Their lives may have seemed distant or abstract, but they too were human, fragile, subject to fear, doubt, and exhaustion. What is fascinating about legacy is that it rarely reflects the truth. We remember names, dates, and achievements, but rarely the quiet fears, obsessions, and small acts of rebellion that defined the lives of monarchs. Queen Victoria, mourning Albert for decades, shows us that even immense power does not shield one from grief. Napoleon, exiled and pacing the shores of St. Helena, illustrates that even the most ambitious cannot outrun reflection, regret, and memory. This is the subtle, sleepy lesson of history. Power is temporary. Fame is fleeting. Fragility is eternal. And in the soft twilight of their lives, whether in exile, mourning, or quiet contemplation, monarchs teach us something gentle yet profound, that humans, regardless of status, live, suffer, reflect, and rest, that legacy is less about grandeur and more about quiet endurance. As you listen, allow yourself to feel this gentle reflection. Imagine the empty corridors, the silent palaces, the echoes of lives that once seemed larger than life, now soft, patient, fading. And now, breathe slowly. Let the weight of centuries fade from your mind. Let the quiet rhythm of history carry you, slowly, gently, into the calmest sleep imaginable. Good night. Imagine a morning in Versailles, sunlight creeping across gilded halls, footsteps echoing quietly on polished floors, courtiers moving with silent precision, and Louis XIV waking not only to a kingdom, but to ritual, routine, and expectation. Or a winter morning in Russia, Peter the Great inspecting a shipyard, dressed plainly, hands busy with wood and metal, not as a show of power, but as a personal obsession, a rhythm that grounded him in the otherwise chaotic weight of empire.
Even Queen Victoria's days had cadence, mornings with letters, afternoons with mourning protocols, evenings spent reflecting on Albert's absence, all flowing in a rhythm dictated by love, grief, and duty. These daily patterns, small as they may seem, reveal the human side of royalty. They were not just figures of authority or legend. They were people navigating routines, rituals, obsessions, and solitude. The crown may have been heavy, but these quiet rhythms gave structure, comfort, and a sense of control. Sometimes the greatest stories are not the battles won or the laws passed. They are the soft routines, the quiet walks in palace gardens, the private readings by candlelight, the meticulous notes, the small acts of self-care, the lonely sighs. History, in its grand scope, often forgets these tiny rhythms, but they are the threads that weave human life into the tapestry of power. As you listen, imagine these slow, patient patterns across centuries. Feel the soft pulse of history moving gently, not demanding, not dramatic, just quietly flowing, like a river through the lives of kings and queens. And now, breathe. Let the past wash over you like a gentle tide. Let the whispers of routine, reflection, and human fragility carry you, slowly, gently, into deep, restful sleep. Good night. Imagine a palace empty at dusk, the sunlight fading across golden floors, a faint echo of footsteps that once carried kings and queens across grand halls. Even the walls seem to whisper, holding stories of joy, grief, obsession, and quiet moments of human fragility. No expectations. Just breathe. Just feel the stillness. Let the soft, patient heartbeat of centuries carry you, slowly, gently, into the deepest, most restorative sleep imaginable. Time is still. History is quiet. And now, so can you. Good night. All the palaces are silent. All the corridors are empty. All the thrones, the crowns, the ceremonies have dissolved into stillness. The kings, queens, and emperors you've met, their fears, ambitions, obsessions, and routines have faded into memory. History no longer calls. No dates, no battles, no intrigue. Only the soft, patient rhythm of human life remains, a gentle pulse across centuries, fragile, quiet, enduring. And you can let go completely. No need to remember, no need to think. Just breathe. Just feel the stillness and let the quiet, infinite rest of history carry you, slowly, gently, into deep, endless sleep. Time is still. History is soft. And now, so can you. Good night. Consider the life of Charles VI of France,
known as Charles the Mad, a king whose mind sometimes betrayed him, whose fears became rituals, whose body and mind struggled under the weight of expectation. To history, he might appear as a failure, but to us, he is a reminder that even those with immense power are still human, vulnerable, and often quietly suffering. Marie Antoinette, often caricatured as frivolous, lived a life of constant scrutiny, isolation, and personal tragedy. She lost children, friends, and ultimately freedom. Her luxurious image often hides the deeply human reality. She endured, she adapted, and she struggled to survive under impossible expectations. Even rulers who seemed strong, decisive, and flawless, like Elizabeth I or Louis XIV, were shaped by fear, loneliness, obsession, and the weight of routine. What is fascinating about these lives is not only their public triumphs, but their small, personal acts of humanity. Louis XIV walking in secret gardens, Peter the Great inspecting his ships late at night, Queen Victoria mourning for decades. These quiet acts reveal the pulse of human life behind power. They are reminders that fragility, curiosity, and emotion exist even in the most exalted positions. As you listen, allow yourself to feel the gentle rhythm of these lessons. Power is fleeting. Recognition is temporary. Fragility endures. Humanity persists. History softens in reflection. Names fade, dates blur. Only the lessons, the human truths, and the quiet endurance remain. So breathe slowly. Feel the pulse of centuries. Let the quiet reflections of kings and queens carry you, slowly, gently, into a calm, restorative sleep. Good night. Even the grandest rulers had quirks. Louis XIV, the Sun King, obsessed with etiquette. Every gesture, every meal, every bow had to be performed in the correct order, at the correct time, in the correct place. He ruled a nation through routine, and his life became a series of orchestrated movements, like a slow, majestic dance. Peter the Great, far from the ornate halls of Versailles, obsessed with practical innovations. He measured, he calculated, he walked shipyards endlessly. Power for him was a series of quiet, precise rituals that gave structure to life. Marie Antoinette, often remembered for dresses and jewels, found small comforts in simple things, reading letters late at night, whispering to trusted confidants, or strolling alone in gardens. These little habits kept her grounded in a world that was otherwise overwhelming. Even monarchs famed for decisiveness had private rhythms. Elizabeth I would walk, sometimes for hours, reciting poetry to herself. Charles VI of France, in his bouts of instability, clung to daily routines that offered some sense of control. Queen Victoria, in mourning, developed rituals of letter writing and quiet reflection that lasted for decades.
These rituals may seem mundane, trivial, or even humorous, but they were deeply human. They were small islands of comfort in seas of responsibility, expectation, and loneliness. As you listen, imagine these quiet, deliberate habits. A ruler pacing silently in a garden, a queen scribbling in the candlelight, an emperor inspecting a miniature shipyard. Every gesture, every ritual, a heartbeat of human life behind power. And as you imagine these rhythms, let yourself drift. Let the small obsessions, the quiet routines, the gentle habits carry you slowly, gently, into a deep, restorative sleep. Good night. Even the most powerful rulers carried quiet burdens. Louis XIV, despite his glory as the Sun King, often worried about conspiracies, court intrigue, and the possibility of betrayal. Power did not erase anxiety, it often magnified it. Marie Antoinette, facing constant scrutiny and looming danger, carried fears of isolation, loss, and misunderstanding. Her lavish lifestyle, often criticized, masked the quiet tension of a woman trying to survive in an unforgiving world. Charles VI of France, known for his mental struggles, feared losing control, both of his mind and his kingdom. Every bout of instability came with hidden dread, isolation, and the constant, gentle pressure of expectations. Even confident rulers like Elizabeth I experienced private anxieties. The pressure to remain unmarried, to maintain control, to navigate threats both domestic and foreign. These quiet fears were a daily companion, often hidden behind public poise and elegance. The fascinating truth is that power does not eliminate vulnerability. It may amplify it, disguise it, or surround it with ceremony, but the human heart remains delicate, sensitive, and quietly restless. As you listen, imagine these quiet moments of these rulers. A king pacing silently in his chambers, thinking of enemies he may never see. A queen staring out a window, worrying for the safety of her children. An emperor whispering to himself late at night, calculating, reflecting, fearing. These hidden fears and quiet anxieties, while soft and gentle, are profoundly human. They remind us that beneath every crown, behind every throne, there was a heartbeat, a mind, and a soul. And as you imagine these subtle human truths, allow yourself to drift. Let the quiet worries of rulers fade. Let the echoes of centuries wash over you. And let the gentle rhythm of history carry you, slowly, gently, into deep, restorative sleep. Good night. Even those who seemed distant or powerful experienced personal connections that shaped their lives. Marie Antoinette, often criticized publicly, had moments of genuine tenderness with her children and close friends. These quiet bonds gave her comfort in a world of scrutiny and danger. Louis XIV, for all his grandeur, had companions and confidants who offered him laughter, advice, and solace. His relationships, though sometimes strategic, were also deeply human, providing small islands of warmth amid the heavy routines of monarchy. Queen Victoria, mourning Albert for decades, maintained a private life full of letters, memories, and small rituals of love. Even after great loss, these personal attachments offered her a sense of continuity, connection, and emotional grounding. Napoleon, though a figure of immense ambition, cherished moments of personal reflection with Josephine, with his family, and even with trusted aides. Power did not replace love, it coexisted with it, quietly, in private moments. These intimate moments remind us that behind every crown was a heart capable of tenderness, connection, and subtle joy. Even amidst expectation, war, and duty, monarchs experienced the human need for closeness. As you listen, imagine these private moments. A queen writing letter to a beloved child. A king walking silently in a garden, lost in thought of someone dear. An emperor whispering to himself late at night, calculating,
reflecting, fearing. These hidden fears and quiet anxieties, while soft and gentle, are profoundly human. They remind us that beneath every crown, behind every throne, there was a heartbeat, a mind, and a soul. And as you imagine these subtle human truths, allow yourself to drift. Let the quiet worries of rulers fade. Let the echoes of centuries wash over you, and let the gentle rhythm of history carry you, slowly, gently, into deep, restorative sleep. Good night. Even the most powerful rulers found joy in little things. Louis XIV enjoyed walks in the gardens of Versailles, observing the symmetry of fountains and flowers, a quiet contrast to the weight of rulership. Peter the Great found satisfaction in building and inspecting ships, a hands-on obsession that offered him focus and calm. Marie Antoinette found solace in reading, writing letters, and enjoying private conversations away from the constant scrutiny of court. Her small pleasures were acts of personal freedom, tiny rebellions against a life dictated by ceremony. Queen Victoria treasured her daily routines, the comfort of letters from loved ones, and the gentle rhythms of a household carefully maintained. Even amid mourning, these small comforts offered grounding and emotional stability. Napoleon, though a figure of immense ambition, cherished moments of personal reflection with Josephine, with his family, and even with trusted aides. Power did not replace love, it coexisted with it, quietly, in private moments. These intimate moments remind us that behind every crown was a heart capable of tenderness, connection, and subtle joy. Even amidst expectation, war, and duty, monarchs experienced the human need for closeness. As you listen, imagine these private moments. A queen writing a letter to a beloved child. A king walking silently in a garden, lost in thought of someone dear. An emperor whispering to himself late at night, calculating, reflecting, fearing. These hidden fears and quiet anxieties, while soft and gentle, are profoundly human. They remind us that beneath every crown, behind every throne, there was a heartbeat, a mind, and a soul. And as you imagine these subtle human truths, allow yourself to drift. Let the quiet worries of rulers fade. Let the echoes of centuries wash over you, and let the gentle rhythm of history carry you, slowly, gently, into deep, restorative sleep. Good night. Even the most powerful rulers found joy in little things. Louis XIV enjoyed walks in the gardens of Versailles, observing the symmetry of fountains and flowers, a quiet contrast to the weight of rulership. Peter the Great found satisfaction in building and inspecting ships, a hands-on obsession that offered him focus and calm. Marie Antoinette found solace in reading, writing letters, and enjoying private conversations away from the constant scrutiny of court. Her small pleasures were acts of personal freedom, tiny rebellions against a life dictated by ceremony. Queen Victoria treasured her daily routines, the comfort of letters from loved ones, and the gentle rhythms of a household carefully maintained. Even amid mourning, these small comforts offered grounding and emotional stability. Napoleon, though a figure of immense ambition, cherished moments of personal reflection with Josephine, with his family, and even with trusted aides. Power did not replace love, it coexisted with it, quietly, in private moments. These intimate moments remind us that behind every crown was a heart capable of tenderness, connection, and subtle joy.
Even amidst expectation, war, and duty, monarchs experienced the human need for closeness. As you listen, imagine these private moments. A queen writing a letter to a beloved child.
A king walking silently in a garden, lost in thought of someone dear. An emperor laughing softly with a confidant, away from the public eye. These small, tender acts are whispers of humanity across centuries. They are reminders that behind power and ceremony lies vulnerability, affection, and the quiet pulse of life. Allow these gentle stories to wash over you. Breathe slowly. Feel the calm rhythm of love and connection, and let it carry you, slowly, gently, into deep, restorative sleep. Good night. Even the most powerful rulers found joy in little things. Louis XIV enjoyed walks in the gardens of Versailles, observing the symmetry of fountains and flowers, a quiet contrast to the weight of rulership. Peter the Great found satisfaction in building and inspecting ships, a hands-on obsession that offered him focus and calm. Marie Antoinette found solace in reading, writing letters, and enjoying private conversations away from the constant scrutiny of court. Her small pleasures were acts of personal freedom, tiny rebellions against a life dictated by ceremony. Queen Victoria treasured her daily routines, the comfort of letters from loved ones, and the gentle rhythms of a household carefully maintained. Even amid mourning, these comforts offered grounding and emotional stability. Napoleon, though a figure of immense ambition, delighted in strategy games, personal reflections, and moments of quiet conversation with trusted aides. Even the most driven monarchs sought out the subtle joys that reminded them of their humanity. As you listen, imagine these gentle moments. A king enjoying the warmth of sunlight on a quiet terrace. A queen sipping tea, lost in thought. An emperor pausing to admire a garden or a work of art, finding peace in detail. These are the quiet rhythms of life behind crowns and thrones. They remind us that even amid duty, responsibility, and expectation, there is room for small joys, subtle pleasures, and soft contentment. Let yourself drift alongside these peaceful moments. Breathe slowly. Feel the gentle rhythm of life, calm and steady, and let it carry you, slowly, gently, into deep, restorative sleep. Good night. Even those who once commanded nations eventually met quiet conclusions. Louis XIV, after decades of ruling, spent his final hours surrounded by familiar routines, familiar faces, and the slow cadence of a life lived long and fully. His grandeur softened into serenity, a gentle acknowledgement of the passage of time. Queen Victoria, after years of mourning and reflection, found peace in her private routines, the letters she wrote, and the memories she cherished. Her final moments were quiet, unassuming, and full of the gentle rhythm of daily life that had shaped her long reign. Napoleon, exiled and distant from the world he once controlled, spent his final days in reflection, observation, and solitude. Even the greatest ambitions ultimately softened into simple human presence, breathing, thinking, observing, remembering.
Marie Antoinette's life, though cut tragically short in the public eye, also contains moments of private reflection and quiet dignity in her final days, demonstrating the enduring human need for peace even amid turmoil. The serene endings of monarchs remind us that every life, no matter how powerful, is ultimately gentle, fragile, and finite. The crowns are set aside. The ceremonies are done. All that remains is quiet, reflection, and the human heartbeat. As you listen, imagine these serene conclusions. A king resting quietly in his chambers, letting the weight of responsibility drift away. A queen closing her eyes in the soft light of morning, surrounded by memories and calm. An emperor quietly observing the world one last time, letting the flow of life carry him onward. These moments are soft, patient, and profound. They remind us that power is temporary, history is enduring, and the human spirit is quietly resilient. Let these serene endings wash over you. Breathe slowly. Feel the gentle rhythm of life, reflection, and calm, and let it carry you, slowly, gently, into deep, restorative sleep. Good night. Even after crowns are set aside, after thrones grow cold, and after the world moves on, there remain traces of their lives, soft echoes, gentle imprints in the corridors of history. Louis XIV's gardens still bloom in memory. Peter the Great's ships still linger in stories of innovation and ambition. Marie Antoinette's letters still whisper of tenderness, grief, and quiet resilience. And Victoria's journals still carry the gentle rhythm of endurance and love. These whispers are not loud. They do not demand attention. They drift softly through time, like a gentle breeze through an empty palace. They remind us of the humanity behind power, the fragility behind ceremony, and the small joys, fears, and loves that define a life. As you listen, imagine these soft persistences of legacies, the quiet echo of a king's footsteps in a long hallway,
The gentle flutter of a queen's letter in candlelight. The subtle, lasting traces of private moments, rituals, and reflections that continue beyond memory. History does not end. It whispers. It carries the soft pulse of human life through centuries. And in that whisper, there is calm, there is peace, there is rest. Allow yourself to drift with these whispers. Breathe slowly. Let the quiet rhythm of centuries carry you, slowly, gently, into the deepest, most restorative sleep imaginable. Good night. Even the most powerful monarchs were human first, fragile, thoughtful, and quietly experiencing the world. Louis XIV, Peter the Great, Marie Antoinette, Queen Victoria, each left traces not just in stone, gold, or history books, but in the soft human moments of reflection, habit, and connection. The lessons are subtle. Power is temporary. Ambition fades. Fear, love, and hope endure quietly, like whispers carried on the wind. As you listen, imagine the vast corridors of time stretching endlessly. The gentle footsteps of monarchs long gone, the quiet rustle of letters and scrolls holding human thoughts and feelings, the soft, persistent rhythms of life, love, and reflection echoing across centuries. Even when history forgets names and dates, these human moments remain. They are the invisible threads connecting every life, every decision, and every story. Threads that continue softly,
patiently and endlessly. Allow yourself to float within this continuum. Feel the gentle pulse of centuries, the quiet heartbeat of human experience, and let it carry you, slowly, gently, into the deepest, calmest, most restorative sleep imaginable. Good night. All the palaces are silent. All the corridors are empty. All the ceremonies, rituals, and displays of power have softened into stillness. The kings, queens, and rulers you've met tonight, their ambitions, fears, joys, and private routines have gently faded into memory. Even when history records grandeur or tragedy, at its core lies a soft human pulse, quiet and enduring. It whispers of life lived, choices made, loves experienced, and fears quietly endured. And now you can drift freely too. No need to recall names, events, or dynasties. Just breathe. Just feel the gentle rhythm of life across centuries. Let the soft, patient echoes of history carry you, slowly, gently, into the deepest, most restorative sleep imaginable. Time is still. History is soft. And now, so can you. Even the most powerful monarchs, Louis XIV, Peter the Great, Marie Antoinette, Queen Victoria, were human first. They laughed, worried, loved, grieved, and reflected just as we do today. Their experiences, grand in scale, yet profoundly ordinary in essence, remind us that human life, in all its fragility and complexity, has a timeless rhythm. Consider the quiet threads connecting centuries of rulers. The care with which a king walks through his gardens, noticing details others might miss. The letters a queen writes in candlelight, preserving thought and memory. The private routines and small obsessions that bring comfort in a life of ceremony and duty. History is often told through events, wars, and dynasties, but beneath all that lies a soft continuity, the heartbeat of human life, quietly persistent across time. Each ruler, each dynasty, each century contributes a gentle pulse to this ongoing story, a rhythm that reminds us of connection, reflection, and enduring humanity.
As you listen, imagine this quiet continuity. A king long gone, walking silently through an empty hall. A queen's voice carried softly through letters, whispering reflection and care. The faint echoes of daily life, small joys, and tender routines blending across centuries. These soft threads of human experience can carry you into calmness, peace, and rest. Let yourself float within this gentle rhythm. Breathe slowly. Feel the subtle pulse of life, history, and humanity, and allow it to carry you, slowly, gently, into deep, restorative sleep. Good night. Even the grandest rulers, Louis XIV, Peter the Great, Marie Antoinette, Queen Victoria, lived with the same human concerns we know today. Love and loss, joy and sorrow, fear, doubt, and hope. These lives, though framed by crowns and thrones, carry gentle lessons that power is fleeting, that wealth and grandeur do not erase human vulnerability, that the smallest, quietest moments often leave the deepest impressions. Consider the tender moments we've encountered. A queen writing letters in solitude, her words echoing through generations. A king walking in private gardens, noticing beauty while ruling a kingdom.
and emperors quietly reflecting on his decisions, aware of both triumphs and errors. History, in its quietest moments, teaches patience. It reminds us that human life is intricate, fragile, and profoundly interconnected. Even mistakes, fears, and failures leave echoes that carry meaning. Even moments of joy, tenderness, or reflection ripple across time. As you listen, let yourself absorb these subtle lessons. Feel the rhythm of life across centuries. Sense the quiet persistence of human thought and emotion. Notice how small acts, subtle reflections, and private rituals can shape worlds, even softly. Let these gentle truths wash over you. Breathe slowly.
Let the calm continuity of history guide your thoughts, slowly, gently, into deep, restorative sleep. Good night. Even kings and queens, those who seemed wrapped in grandeur, lived lives full of quiet rituals. Louis XIV, the Sun King, rose early to inspect his gardens, his days structured around meticulous schedules of ceremony, meals, and observation. Peter the Great walked among shipyards, measuring, planning, and attending to small details, finding rhythm and satisfaction in repetition. Marie Antoinette enjoyed quiet mornings with letters, books, and conversations in private chambers, small comforts amidst a bustling court. These routines, while sometimes strict or ceremonial, offered stability, calm, and quiet pleasure. They reminded rulers that amidst the weight of power, life still flows in gentle, predictable patterns. Even the smallest rituals had meaning: the careful arrangement of flowers in a vase, the preparation of a favorite meal, the reading of a book by candlelight. These daily acts, though seemingly ordinary, created a soft, continuous rhythm that guided life, anchored thought, and brought comfort. As you listen, imagine these serene routines: a king pacing a sunlit hallway, noting the symmetry of shadows; a queen sipping tea in quiet reflection, watching the world move slowly beyond the palace walls; an emperor reviewing documents, quietly tracing the lines with his fingers, finding satisfaction in order and rhythm. There is gentle beauty in these small, repeated acts. They remind us that even amidst power, duty, and expectation, life can be quiet, measured, and meditative. Let yourself drift along this rhythm. Breathe slowly. Feel the soft pulse of daily life and human continuity, slowly, gently, into deep, restorative sleep. Good night. Even those who appeared distant or untouchable had little joys that made life more bearable. Louis XIV enjoyed the rhythm of music, the scent of flowers in the palace gardens, and quiet moments observing nature. Peter the Great found satisfaction in craftsmanship, from inspecting ships to designing buildings, relishing the control of creation. Marie Antoinette treasured private gatherings, the quiet pleasure of a letter from a friend, or a moment alone in the garden. These small indulgences, though private and understated, carried immense personal value. They were anchors in days filled with ceremony, expectation, and duty. A cup of tea, a favorite book, a meticulously arranged bouquet, these were the human moments behind the gilded facade. Even the simplest pleasures left lasting impressions. A king savoring a quiet morning before the court awoke,
a queen enjoying a pastry in her chambers while watching sunlight play on the walls, an emperor quietly laughing with a confidant away from the public eye. These indulgences remind us that humanity persists even in grandeur. They are soft, quiet echoes of life that endured beneath crowns, jewels, and thrones. As you listen, imagine these subtle pleasures. A ruler walking slowly through gardens, breathing in flowers and fresh air. A queen lost in the pages of a favorite book, momentarily free from the weight of expectation. An emperor noticing a detail in architecture or art, quietly delighted by its perfection. Let yourself float within these small joys. Breathe slowly. Feel the soft rhythm of life, reflection, and private pleasure. Slowly, gently, into deep, restorative sleep. Good night. Even the most powerful rulers needed moments alone. Louis XIV would walk alone in gardens or corridors, thinking quietly, observing patterns, and letting his mind drift.
Peter the Great found solace in silent reflection while walking among shipyards, considering the world he helped shape. Marie Antoinette cherished private moments in her chambers, reading, writing letters, or simply watching sunlight fall across the palace. Even amidst a life of ceremony, her solitude offered comfort, grounding, and a chance to breathe. Queen Victoria, deeply affected by love and loss, spent long hours in contemplation, writing, and reflecting on life. Her quiet routines were both meditation and refuge, a way to process time, grief, and memory. These reflective moments were essential. They allowed rulers to pause, to consider their choices, to notice beauty, and to reconnect with their humanity. Even amidst immense power, these private spaces of thought were profoundly personal, calm, and restorative. As you listen, imagine these quiet reflections. A king pacing slowly, lost in thought, noticing the soft rhythm of a garden or hallway. A queen sitting silently, pen in hand, capturing fleeting thoughts in a letter. An emperor pausing in the afternoon sun, quietly contemplating life and history. These moments remind us that even in grandeur, solitude provides perspective, calm, and gentle clarity. Let yourself drift along these quiet reflections. Breathe slowly. Feel the soft rhythm of introspection, thought, and calm. Slowly, gently, into deep, restorative sleep. Good night. Even the most powerful rulers experienced tender feelings. Louis XIV, despite his public image of confidence and authority, occasionally wrestled with loneliness and the subtle pressures of expectation. Marie Antoinette, surrounded by grandeur, quietly longed for understanding, connection, and moments of true ease. Peter the Great, ambitious and practical, also had moments of introspection, doubt, and quiet satisfaction in small accomplishments. Queen Victoria's long reign was marked not only by duty, but by enduring affection, sorrow, and reflection on life's fleeting joys. These inner worlds are often overlooked, yet they are profoundly human. Every ritual, habit, and small indulgence carried a layer of emotion, joy, frustration, hope, or melancholy. Even in immense power, monarchs felt the soft pulse of everyday humanity. As you listen, imagine their emotional landscapes.
a king quietly smiling at a small victory or a fleeting moment of beauty, a queen sitting alone, her thoughts drifting to family, memories, or personal joys, an emperor quietly wrestling with doubt, then finding comfort in reflection or ritual. These emotions were soft, gentle, and deeply human. They remind us that beneath every crown is a person navigating life, connection, and feeling, much like we do today. Let yourself drift along these soft emotions. Breathe slowly. Feel the soft pulse of thought, feeling, and reflection. Slowly, gently, into deep, restorative sleep. Good night. Even after crowns are set aside, after thrones grow silent, and after the world moves forward, there remains a delicate echo. Louis XIV's meticulous gardens, architecture, and cultural influence continue to whisper through history. Marie Antoinette's letters, private thoughts, and tender moments quietly inform our understanding of her life and times. Peter the Great's innovations and personal obsessions leave traces that continue to inspire and fascinate. Queen Victoria's reflections, traditions, and personal routines ripple through generations. These legacies are not loud or dramatic. They are soft, patient, and enduring. They exist in the small, quiet moments, rituals, letters, personal habits, and reflections that outlast the pomp of ceremony. The legacy of a ruler is ultimately human, subtle, and calm. As you listen, imagine these soft ripples across time. A king's footsteps echoing in an empty hallway centuries later. A queen's carefully penned letter softly reaching into the minds and hearts of those who read it long after. The smallest details of daily life gently informing history, unnoticed yet persistent. These quiet legacies remind us that history is not only about power and conflict, but about the soft, enduring traces of human life. Even in the grandest lives, it is the subtle, meditative actions that resonate most deeply. Let yourself drift along these soft ripples. Breathe slowly. Feel the calm continuity of life, reflection, and history. Slowly, gently, into deep, restorative sleep. Good night. All the kings and queens we've met, Louis XIV, Peter the Great, Marie Antoinette, Queen Victoria, and countless others have long returned to memory. Their triumphs, mistakes, joys, sorrows, and quiet rituals now exist as gentle echoes, soft and patient, drifting through time. The world has moved on, yet their lives leave subtle ripples, soft threads connecting centuries of human experience. These threads are quiet, almost imperceptible, but persistent. They remind us that even the most extraordinary lives are grounded in ordinary, gentle human moments. As you listen, imagine drifting along these threads. The soft footsteps of a long-gone king fading into silence. The faint rustle of a queen's letter whispering across generations.
The gentle, continuous pulse of life, memory, and history moving slowly around you. There is no rush, no urgency, no expectation. Just the soft, enduring rhythm of life and reflection. Breathe slowly. Feel your body soften. Feel your mind drift alongside centuries of thought, emotion, and quiet human presence. Allow history to cradle you, slowly, gently, into the deepest, most restorative sleep imaginable. Good night. The kings and queens we've met, Louis XIV, Peter the Great, Marie Antoinette, Queen Victoria, and countless others, now exist as soft echoes in memory, quiet threads drifting across centuries. Their lives, their choices, their small joys and tender reflections all merge into a slow, gentle rhythm, a pattern of human experience, both personal and universal. Imagine this calm. The soft rustle of leaves in a palace garden long ago. The faint glow of candlelight on a queen's letter. The gentle, unhurried passage of time carrying life and reflection like a gentle, winding river. There is nothing to do, nothing to recall, nothing to achieve, just the soft pulse of existence carrying you deeper into quiet, meditative stillness. Feel the gentle rhythm of life, history, and human presence. Breathe slowly. Let the centuries wrap around you like a soft, protective blanket. Allow yourself to drift further, slowly, gently, into deep, endless restorative sleep. Good night. The kings and queens we've met, Louis XIV, Peter the Great, Marie Antoinette, Queen Victoria, and countless others, now exist as soft echoes in memory, quiet threads drifting across centuries. Their lives, their choices, their small joys and tender reflections all merge into a slow, gentle rhythm, a pattern of human experience, both personal and universal. Imagine this calm. The soft rustle of leaves in a palace garden long ago. The faint glow of candlelight on a queen's letter. The gentle, unhurried passage of time carrying life and reflection like a gentle, winding river. There is nothing to do, nothing to recall, nothing to achieve, just the soft pulse of existence carrying you deeper into quiet, meditative stillness. Feel the gentle rhythm of life, history, and human presence. Breathe slowly. Let the centuries wrap around you like a soft, protective blanket. Allow yourself to drift further, slowly, gently, into deep, endless restorative sleep. Good night. The kings and queens we've met, Louis XIV, Peter the Great, Marie Antoinette, Queen Victoria, and countless others, now exist as soft echoes in memory, quiet threads drifting across centuries. Their lives, their choices, their small joys and tender reflections all merge into a slow, gentle rhythm, a pattern of human experience, both personal and universal. Imagine this calm. The soft rustle of leaves in a palace garden long ago. The faint glow of candlelight on a queen's letter. The gentle, unhurried passage of time carrying life and reflection like a gentle, winding river. There is nothing to do, nothing to recall, nothing to achieve, just the soft pulse of existence carrying you deeper into quiet, meditative stillness. Feel the gentle rhythm of life, history, and human presence. Breathe slowly. Let the centuries wrap around you like a soft, protective blanket.
Allow yourself to drift further, slowly, gently, into deep, endless, restorative sleep. Good night.
The gentle, continuous pulse of life, memory, and history moving slowly around you. There is no rush, no urgency, no expectation. Just the soft, enduring rhythm of life and reflection. Breathe slowly. Feel your body soften. Feel your mind drift alongside centuries of thought, emotion, and quiet human presence. Allow history to cradle you, slowly, gently, into the deepest, most restorative sleep imaginable. Good night. The kings and queens we've met, Louis XIV, Peter the Great, Marie Antoinette, Queen Victoria, and countless others, now exist as soft echoes in memory, quiet threads drifting across centuries. Their lives, their choices, their small joys and tender reflections all merge into a slow, gentle rhythm, a pattern of human experience, both personal and universal. Imagine this calm. The soft rustle of leaves in a palace garden long ago. The faint glow of candlelight on a queen's letter. The gentle, unhurried passage of time, carrying life and reflection like a gentle, winding river. There is nothing to do, nothing to recall, nothing to achieve, just the soft pulse of existence carrying you deeper into quiet, meditative stillness. Feel the gentle rhythm of life, history, and human presence. Breathe slowly. Let the centuries wrap around you like a soft, protective blanket. Allow yourself to drift further, slowly, gently, into deep, endless restorative sleep. Good night. The kings and queens we've met, Louis XIV, Peter the Great, Marie Antoinette, Queen Victoria, and countless others, now exist as soft echoes in memory, quiet threads drifting across centuries. Their lives, their choices, their small joys and tender reflections all merge into a slow, gentle rhythm, a pattern of human experience, both personal and universal. Imagine this calm. The soft rustle of leaves in a palace garden long ago. The faint glow of candlelight on a queen's letter. The gentle, unhurried passage of time carrying life and reflection like a gentle, winding river. There is nothing to do, nothing to recall, nothing to achieve, just the soft pulse of existence carrying you deeper into quiet, meditative stillness. Feel the gentle rhythm of life, history, and human presence. Breathe slowly. Let the centuries wrap around you like a soft, protective blanket. Allow yourself to drift further, slowly, gently, into deep, endless, restorative sleep. Good night. The kings and queens we've met, Louis XIV, Peter the Great, Marie Antoinette, Queen Victoria, and countless others, now exist as soft echoes in memory, quiet threads drifting across centuries. Their lives, their choices, their small joys and tender reflections all merge into a slow, gentle rhythm, a pattern of human experience, both personal and universal. Imagine this calm.
the soft rustle of leaves in a palace garden long ago, the faint glow of candlelight on a queen's letter, the gentle, unhurried passage of time carrying life and reflection like a gentle, winding river. There is nothing to do, nothing to recall, nothing to achieve, just the soft pulse of existence carrying you deeper into quiet, meditative stillness. Feel the gentle rhythm of life, history, and human presence. Breathe slowly. Let the centuries wrap around you like a soft, protective blanket. Allow yourself to drift further, slowly, gently, into deep, endless restorative sleep. Good night.
The kings, queens, and rulers we've met, Louis XIV, Peter the Great, Marie Antoinette, Queen Victoria, now exist as soft echoes, quiet threads drifting across history. Their lives, choices, joys, and reflections merge into a slow, gentle rhythm, a tapestry of human experience, both personal and universal. Imagine this calm. The soft rustle of leaves in a forgotten garden. The faint glow of candlelight on a queen's letter. The slow, unhurried passage of time carrying life, reflection, and memory like a gentle river. There is nothing to do, nothing to recall, nothing to achieve, only the soft pulse of existence carrying you deeper into quiet, meditative stillness. Feel the gentle rhythm of life, history, and human presence. Breathe slowly. Let the centuries wrap around you like a soft, protective blanket. Allow yourself to drift further, slowly, gently,
into deep, restorative, endless sleep. Good night. All the kings, queens, and rulers, Louis XIV, Peter the Great, Marie Antoinette, Queen Victoria, now exist as soft echoes, lingering threads in the tapestry of time. Their lives, small joys, private reflections, and quiet habits drift gently, merging into an infinite, unhurried rhythm. There is no need to recall names, dates, or events. There is no expectation, no tension, no rush. Only the soft pulse of life and time, carrying you slowly and gently forward. Imagine yourself floating along this quiet, infinite river. The faint rustle of leaves in a sunlit palace garden. The soft glow of candlelight illuminating a queen's quiet letter. The slow, unbroken rhythm of life, reflection, and memory drifting around you like a gentle river. Every breath aligns with this gentle rhythm. Every heartbeat merges with the calm, infinite cadence of history. Time softens, thoughts fade. All that remains is presence, peace, and restorative stillness. Breathe slowly. Feel the soft currents of centuries, lives, and quiet reflection guiding you, slowly, gently, into deep, timeless, restorative sleep. Good night. All the kings, queens, and rulers, Louis XIV, Peter the Great, Marie Antoinette, Queen Victoria, and countless others now exist as soft, lingering echoes. Their lives, emotions, quiet routines, and small joys blend seamlessly into the gentle flow of time. They remind us that history is not only events,
power, or conflict. It is the soft continuity of human life. Imagine this calm, the faint rustle of leaves in long-abandoned palace gardens, the delicate glow of candlelight illuminating private thoughts, letters, or reflections, the slow, unbroken rhythm of life, memory, and human presence drifting around you like a gentle river. There is nothing to remember, nothing to worry about, nothing to accomplish. Only the soft pulse of existence remains, carrying you slowly and effortlessly into complete rest. Feel your body soften. Feel your mind drift. Every breath matches the slow, patient rhythm of history itself. Every heartbeat merges with the gentle cadence of life and reflection. Time itself becomes soft, unhurried, and infinite. Allow yourself to completely surrender to this calm. Allow the echoes of centuries, the quiet presence of human thought, and the lingering traces of rulers' lives to cradle you, slowly, gently, into deep, restorative, timeless sleep. Good night.